Liza Jameson, 15 years old, disappeared 10 years ago in her hometown of Woodsville. Despite all the police efforts, the search yielded no results. The whole family had given up hope, and life moved on. But one day, while doing a deep cleaning in their old house, her father, John, finds an old music box that belonged to Liza. Her name is engraved on the lid, but what sets it apart are the unusual marks on the surface, scratches as if someone had tried to hide them. He opens the box and inside finds a letter. Note addressed to Liza with unexplored symbols that she used to draw. This letter sets off a chain of events that will guide John and his family on the path to unraveling the mystery of their daughter's disappearance. Chapter 1, The Beginning. It was the summer of 1987 and the small town of Woodsville, nestled in the heart of New Hampshire, felt eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that settled deep into the bones of those who had lived there for years, a stillness that could almost be felt in the air. The kind of quiet that made the past seem more distant, more like a dream. The Jameson house, an aging two-story structure that had seen better days, was a reflection of the family that lived there. Inside, the walls were lined with memories, photos of vacations, family gatherings, birthdays, and moments of joy. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. It was all about to be left behind. The boxes stacked high in every corner, taped shut with care, each one filled with remnants of a life they could no longer live. The old furniture was gone, replaced by the harsh presence of cardboard and bubble wrap. The once warm and inviting space now felt cold and empty. John Jameson and his wife Catherine stood at the front door of their home, staring out at the world they had known for so long. Their house was packed, ready to be sold. They were leaving Woodsville, leaving behind the place where their daughter Liza had vanished 10 years ago. The decision had been made weeks ago. The moving company was scheduled to arrive the next morning. It was time to move on. Catherine's eyes scanned the piles of boxes that now filled the house, a silent ache in her chest as she surveyed the scene. The house, once alive with the sound of Liza's laughter and footsteps, now seemed like a hollow shell. Her fingers grazed the edge of a photo frame, the smiling face of a young girl staring back at her. Liza, her daughter, the little girl who had been taken from them so suddenly, so cruelly, on that fateful day during the spring concert reception in 1977. She took a deep breath and wiped her eyes, her resolve to leave the past behind faltering for just a moment. She couldn't deny that this was harder than she had imagined. 10 years had passed, but the pain was still raw. The memories still felt fresh. The unanswered questions still lingered in the air like ghosts. John stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He had always been the strong one, the one who held it all together when Catherine's grief threatened to overwhelm her. But even now, as he looked out the house, his heart felt heavy. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were running away, that moving across the country wouldn't erase the hole that had been left in their lives. "You sure this is the right decision?" John's voice was low, tinged with doubt. He had been silent for hours, his mind wandering between the life they had known and the future they were trying to build. Catherine turned to him, her expression softening, but her eyes still clouded with the remnants of sorrow. "We can't keep doing this, John. We can't keep living in the past. It's time to move on." She didn't have to say more. John understood. They had both been trapped in this house, in these memories, for far too long. The police had stopped looking for Liza years ago. The case had gone cold, and with each passing year, the hope of finding her had dwindled. But John never stopped wondering, what happened to her? Where did she go? Why did she vanish without a trace? They had tried everything, searching the woods behind their house, speaking with anyone who might have seen something, but nothing had ever come of it. The town had moved on, but John and Catherine hadn't. They couldn't. Every room in this house, every corner, every object, held a piece of their daughter. They had never been able to let go. They made their way up to the attic, the only room in the house that had been left untouched by the moving boxes. The stairs creaked under their weight, the old wood groaning as if protesting their presence. The attic was cluttered with forgotten memories. Old furniture, Christmas decorations, dusty trunks filled with mementos. Catherine started to clear out a stack of boxes, her hands moving mechanically as she packed away the last remnants of their life in Woodsville. John, meanwhile, stood by the window, gazing out over the town, his thoughts far away. Then something caught his eye. A small object sitting on the floor of the attic, partially obscured by an old trunk. He moved toward it, brushing aside the dust that had settled over the years. It was a music box, a small, delicate thing, covered in a layer of dust, its once polished surface now worn and scratched. John's fingers brushed over the box's surface, and for a moment he was transported back to another time, another place. A time when this music box had been a symbol of joy, of childhood innocence. He picked it up carefully, his heart skipping a beat. He recognized it instantly. This was Liza's music box, the one she had received for her birthday when she was young, the one she had carried with her everywhere. It had always been one of her favorite things. She used to wind it up and let it play the same song over and over again, a song that had become a lullaby for them all. John ran his fingers over the top of the box, noticing the faint scratches on the lid. They weren't there before. As he examined it closer, he noticed something odd. There was an engraving on the box, something he hadn't seen before. It was faint, almost as if it had been scratched into the surface recently. He squinted, trying to make out the markings, but they were too unclear. His curiosity piqued, he turned the box over, and to his surprise, he found a small latch on the bottom. Without thinking, he opened it. Inside, nestled in the velvet lining, was a small piece of folded paper. John's heart raced as he pulled it out, unfolding the brittle paper with shaking hands. The paper was old, yellowed with age, and the writing was faint. But as he studied it, he realized that it was a letter, one addressed to Liza. John's fingers trembled as he read the first line. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and the words didn't make sense. The symbols, the strange marks that seemed to dance across the page, were like nothing he had ever seen before. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was in front of him. What was this? What did it mean? He glanced up at Catherine, who had been busy sorting through old photo albums. She looked up at him, her face puzzled. John was holding the letter, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Catherine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need to see this. There's something here. Something strange." Catherine crossed the room to him, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw the letter in John's hands and felt a chill run down her spine. The letter, the symbols, the strange markings, everything about this felt wrong. It was as if Liza had left them a message, one they were only now beginning to understand. John looked at her, his face pale. "Catherine, this isn't just a letter. This is a clue to what happened to Liza." Catherine's eyes widened in shock as she took the letter from him, her mind racing. Could this really be the key to unlocking the mystery of their daughter's disappearance? Could it be that, after all these years, they were finally about to get an answer? But as Catherine scanned the paper, she realized that the symbols didn't just represent a clue. They were a warning. And somewhere, out there, someone was watching them. Chapter 2, Deepening the Conflict. The quiet town of Woodsville had long since settled back into its regular rhythm, the same calm that had blanketed it since the disappearance of Liza 10 years ago. But for John and Catherine Jameson, nothing felt calm anymore. The letter found in the music box, the strange symbols, the eerie feeling that something was stirring in the air, had unsettled them in ways they couldn't quite explain. The pain of losing their daughter still felt like a fresh wound, but now there was a new layer to their grief, a creeping suspicion that they had missed something all along. John couldn't shake the image of those strange symbols etched onto the paper, the cryptic markings that seemed out of place. It wasn't just a letter. It felt like a piece of a puzzle they hadn't known existed. Something about the way the letter had been hidden, tucked away inside the music box that had once been a symbol of innocence, made it seem deliberate. Someone wanted them to find it. But who? And why now, after all these years? Catherine, equally unsettled, had spent the entire night replaying the moments when she had seen the letter. It wasn't just the symbols, it was the timing. Liza's disappearance had never been solved, and the town had long since moved on. But Catherine couldn't. She couldn't let go. The thought that there was something they had missed, something they were still supposed to find, gnawed at her. As much as she tried to push it away, she knew they had to find out what the symbols meant. And so, they decided to go to the one person who might be able to shed some light on the mystery, Detective Michael Hayes. Detective Hayes had been a part of their lives ever since Liza had disappeared in 1977. He had been the one to take the case, to dig through the evidence and interview witnesses. But after months of dead ends, the case had gone cold. He was one of the few people who still held on to hope, even when everyone else had given up. Over the years, he had kept in touch with the Jamesons, offering what little he could, a friendly ear. They found him in his office. John placed the letter. This doesn't look like any. Inside Liza's old music box. Hayes sat back in his chair. We have to know. Hayes sighed deeply. I'll look into it, Hayes said. Time that word so As they left the detective, John decided to take. It wasn't until late in the afternoon. John's heart raced. Meanwhile, Catherine wasn't idle. The tension between them grew. Chapter 3. The first revelations in the small town of Woodsville. John had spent countless. It started with the bodies. John had stumbled upon it, but his heart had stopped. John couldn't contain his John placed the file on. These are the same. John nodded, his face pale. Catherine felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Ritual? What do you mean? Are you saying these people, they were chosen? John didn't respond right away. His mind was still racing. He had been hoping for a moment of clarity, a breakthrough. But now that they had it, the implications were terrifying. Their daughter Liza had been part of something far worse than they had ever imagined. It wasn't just a random abduction. It wasn't a case of a stranger kidnapping her. This was something planned, something that had been orchestrated long before they even realized. The symbols, the disappearances, the connection to the ancient rituals, it all seemed to point to one horrifying conclusion. Liza had been part of a ritualistic practice. She had been selected, like those other people, to play a role in something far more sinister than either John or Catherine could have ever imagined. Catherine's hand shook as she reached for the letter. She held it tightly, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. The handwriting, the symbols, it all felt like a prelude to something. But what? And why had they never known about it? Why had they been kept in the dark? We have to tell Hayes, Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. We have to make him see that this is connected. He needs to know what we found. John nodded in agreement. They couldn't keep this to themselves any longer. Detective Hayes had been a part of their lives for so many years, and he had been the one to investigate Liza's disappearance. If anyone could make sense of this, it was him. But John couldn't shake the feeling that Hayes, like the rest of them, might not be prepared for the truth they were about to uncover. That night, they called Hayes. It had been hours since they made the discovery, but John couldn't sleep. His mind wouldn't stop racing. What if they were too late? What if someone else had already uncovered the truth? What if they had been living among the perpetrators all along? Hayes agreed to meet them the next day. He was eager but cautious, and when he entered their home the following afternoon, it was clear that something was different about him. He was no longer the same man who had first investigated Liza's case. The years of dead ends, the years of failure, had taken their toll on him. But now, seeing the evidence in front of him, something in his demeanor shifted. He took the papers and studied them carefully, just as John and Catherine had. These symbols, Hayes said, his voice hoarse, are not from around here. They're ancient. This is something I've never seen before, not even in all my years of investigating. John could tell Hayes was struggling to find the words. The detective's expression was grave. His eyes darkened with the weight of what they had discovered. You're right to be scared, Hayes continued. This is a ritual, a very old one, and it's been happening right under our noses. Catherine's heart sank. How do we stop it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Hayes didn't have an answer. There was no clear path forward, no easy way to stop what had been set into motion all those years ago. The ritual was far too deep, and the danger far too great. All they could do now was follow the trail, piece together the puzzle, and hope they weren't too late. As the night wore on, John and Catherine felt the weight of their discovery settle over them. They were no longer just grieving parents. They were part of something much larger, something that threatened the very fabric of their town and their lives. The truth was finally beginning to unravel, but the deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. And no matter how much they wanted to turn back, they couldn't. They had to keep going. For Liza, for all the others who had disappeared, for the truth that had been buried for so long. The fight for their daughter's life and for the safety of their town was just beginning. Chapter 4, Climax. The wind howled through the empty streets of Woodsville as John and Catherine Jameson, followed by Detective Hayes, made their way toward the outskirts of town. The old factory loomed ahead like a silent sentinel, its crumbling stone walls and boarded-up windows betraying the passage of time. It had long been abandoned, its original purpose forgotten by most of the town. But for John, Catherine, and Hayes, this decaying building was the key to unlocking the mystery that had haunted them for over a decade. It was here that the final pieces of the puzzle were waiting to be found, and they couldn't afford to waste any more time. The factory was a place of strange history. Old records and local legends had pointed to its significance, though no one had dared to venture inside in years. The town's industrial boom had long since faded, and with it, the factory's purpose. But as they crossed the overgrown lot, the air seemed charged with a quiet energy, a sense of dread that hung heavily in the air. John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something or someone was waiting for them inside. They approached the rusted metal door, its surface scarred with years of neglect. Hayes, who had seen his fair share of crime scenes, took a deep breath before pushing the door open. The groan of the hinges echoed through the empty space. Inside, the factory was a cavern of dust and darkness, its once bustling machinery now frozen in time. The dim light that filtered through the cracked windows revealed shadows lurking in every corner, like forgotten memories clinging to the walls. The trio moved cautiously through the factory, their footsteps soft against the cracked concrete floor. It didn't take long before they found the first sign of something amiss. Strange markings, similar to the symbols they had seen before, etched into the walls and floors. These symbols were not random. They were deliberate, carefully inscribed with a practiced hand. John's heart raced as he recognized them. These weren't just ancient runes. These were the same symbols that had appeared in Liza's letter. The same ones found on the bodies of the missing locals. They were everywhere, carved into the factory's machinery, on the old workbenches, and even on the floor itself, as if the entire building had been used for something far more sinister than manufacturing. They descended into the basement, where the air grew colder and the silence more oppressive. The basement was a labyrinth of concrete pillars and forgotten corners, its once functional rooms now filled with decay. As they moved deeper into the factory, the floor beneath their feet seemed to tremble, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to uncover its secrets. It was in the farthest corner of the basement that they found what they were looking for. Hidden behind a stack of old crates, they uncovered a series of ancient altars. The altars were surrounded by the same symbols they had seen earlier. And as they approached, the unmistakable scent of old incense filled the air, mingling with the mustiness of the basement. The altars were primitive in design, made from stone and wood, with offerings and trinkets left on them. Worn-out toys, old coins, and other strange objects that made the hairs on the back of John's neck stand on end. As they stood there taking in the macabre scene, a voice broke the silence. "Well, well, well," the voice said, dripping with mockery. "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" John turned quickly, his breath catching in his throat. Standing in the doorway to the basement was a man he hadn't seen in years. A man he had once considered a friend of the family. Thomas, a former music teacher at the academy where Lisa had studied. Thomas had been a quiet, somewhat reserved man, deeply dedicated to his students. He had even worked closely with Liza in the years before her disappearance. But now, standing before them in the dim light, he was a stranger. His once friendly face was twisted into something darker, his eyes cold and calculating. "You," John said, his voice thick with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Thomas smiled, a twisted, knowing smile that made John's blood run cold. "I was wondering how long it would take you to figure it out," he said, stepping further into the room. "You've come all this way, but you still don't understand, do you? You think you've uncovered the truth, but you've only scratched the surface. You're too late." Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you mean? What is all this? What's happened to our daughter?" Thomas chuckled, a low, mocking sound that echoed in the basement. "Your daughter was part of something much bigger than you could ever imagine. Something that has been going on for generations in this town. You think you can just walk in here and solve it? You've underestimated everything that has been done, everything that will continue to be done." He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto theirs with a predatory intensity. "You should have left it alone, but now that you've come this far, I'll give you a taste of what you've been looking for. The truth is, Liza was never meant to be a part of your life. She was always meant for something else, something bigger. And now that you're here, it's too late to turn back." John's heart pounded in his chest. "What are you talking about? What did you do to her?" Thomas's grin widened. "I didn't do anything. I merely facilitated what was already set in motion. Liza was part of the ritual, part of the cycle, And now so are you. John and Catherine exchanged a look of horror, the weight of Thomas's words settling over them like a suffocating cloud. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This wasn't some isolated case of a missing child. This was part of something far darker, something that had been happening in Woodsville for generations, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Thomas took a step back, his hands raised in mock surrender. I'm just a player in this, just like you, just like your daughter. You think you can stop it? You can't. It's already in motion, and now you're part of it too. Before John could react, Thomas turned and fled, disappearing into the shadows of the basement. As the realization of but as the seconds ticked by, they had to but they were not alone. The ritual was far from over. Chapter 5, After Thomas was arrested, in the days that followed, the more the police but there was a shift in the case. John and Catherine, Detective Hayes had yet despite all the evidence, John ran a hand over his, Catherine too grappled with this but despite the pain and the confusion, they pressed on. They had come too far, uncovered too much to turn back now. They turned to the police files once again, hoping for some clue that would explain Liza's disappearance after she had seemingly escaped. Their eyes scanned the photographs of the old factory, the symbols etched into the walls, the altars that had once served as tools of manipulation. The investigation had opened a door to something much darker than they had expected. And now, as they faced the unknown, they realized that Liza's story had yet to be fully told. The sound of the doorbell interrupted their thoughts. It was Detective Hayes, his face tired but resolute. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, his eyes immediately locking with John and Catherine's. I've spoken with Thomas, Hayes began, his voice heavy with the weight of the revelation. He's not giving us much, but there's something you need to know. Something I think you both need to hear. He handed them a small folder containing a photograph and a set of documents. John and Catherine exchanged a look before flipping through the folder. The photograph inside showed a young woman, her face obscured by shadows, but there was no mistaking the likeness to their daughter. The woman in the photo had been found, an anonymous figure who had been living under a different name for years, her memories fractured and obscured. The documents contained reports that suggested she had been seen in a nearby town. Someone had recognized her, and the police had managed to track down her last known location. This is Liza, Hayes continued. She's alive. She's been living under the name Amelia Dawson, just as Thomas had described. But she's been hiding in plain sight, lost in the system. We believe she's been living this way for years, her memory altered, her identity erased. It's as if someone has been controlling her, keeping her in the shadows. John and Catherine felt their hearts race. Their daughter had been right there, just out of reach. They had come so close, but yet so far. The pieces were fitting together, but there was still so much they didn't understand. Hayes went on, explaining how the police had tracked down the woman's last known address, a small house on the edge of town. It was isolated, surrounded by trees, and tucked away from the main road. It was there that they had found the last traces of Amelia Dawson, the woman who was once their daughter Liza. John and Catherine stared at the photograph, their hearts breaking. They had found her, but the truth was still elusive. Who was this person? How had she survived all these years? And what had happened to her after she had escaped from the clutches of Thomas and his dark rituals? They knew one thing for certain: their journey was far from over. The answers they sought were just within reach, but the road ahead would be fraught with even more pain and uncertainty. They would find their daughter again, but the questions that remained would haunt them forever. The final chapter of Liza's story had yet to be written, and they were determined to see it through to the end. Chapter 6, Conclusion. The small town of Woodsville, once silent and forgotten in the larger scheme of things, now stood as the backdrop to a story that had twisted and turned in ways no one had imagined. For years, John and Catherine Jameson had held on to hope, a threadbare hope that had been stretched beyond endurance. They had searched high and low, driven by the belief that their daughter Liza was still alive. But the search had taken them through dark and painful revelations, pulling back the veil on horrors they could never have predicted. Now, standing in the cold, sterile environment of the Woodsville Police Department, John and Catherine finally stood on the precipice of an answer, the final revelation of a search that had lasted far longer than anyone had expected. They were about to meet Liza. She was real, she was alive, but she was also a stranger, both to them and in many ways to herself. The journey had not ended. It had only just begun. Liza, now 22 years old, had changed. She was not the innocent child they had once known, nor was she the teenager who had vanished all those years ago. Her face was older, her eyes tired, reflecting the weight of the years spent under a false identity, far removed from the family she had once known. She sat in a small, cramped interview room at the police station, her posture hunched, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the table. The years had left their mark on her, but there was something else in her eyes. Something deeper, a flicker of recognition, a glimpse of the girl they had lost. John and Catherine entered the room slowly, as if not quite believing that they were finally here, that after all the years of pain and separation, they were on the verge of reclaiming their daughter. The door closed softly behind them, and for a moment there was silence. It was as if the entire world had paused, waiting for something, waiting for Liza to look up, to see them, to recognize them. When Liza finally raised her gaze, it was like the world shifted. Her eyes met theirs, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stretch, as though the years of absence could be undone in that single glance. But the recognition was fleeting. There was something hesitant in her expression, as if she were unsure whether to embrace the people who claimed to be her parents. She had lived so long under a different name, in a world that was not her own, that the concept of family felt distant, almost foreign. Liza's voice was soft, tinged with sorrow and uncertainty, as she spoke, her words barely above a whisper. She could not meet their eyes for long. Her gaze kept flicking downward, as if searching for something that wasn't there. The girl who had once been so full of life, so eager to show her parents her latest accomplishments, had been replaced by someone who was broken, haunted by memories that she could not escape. Liza's voice trembled as she confessed the truth. The part of her that had been lost, the part of her that had been taught to fear returning to the people who had once loved her. "I couldn't come back," she said, her voice cracking. "They told me it would be dangerous. I lost myself. I didn't know how to come back to you." John and Catherine stood frozen for a moment, their hearts shattering as the truth of her words sank in. They had never imagined what their daughter had gone through, never understood the depth of the fear and manipulation that had kept her away for all these years. The girl they had known had been swallowed up by something so dark, so insidious that even now she didn't know who she truly was. Her words, tinged with sadness and regret, hung heavy in the air, and John found it hard to breathe. Catherine, her face pale and tear-streaked, reached out for her daughter. It wasn't the embrace they had imagined. It wasn't the reunion they had dreamed of, where they would hold her and tell her everything would be okay. But it was something. It was a chance, one last chance to bring their daughter back. "We found you, Liza," Catherine whispered, her voice trembling. "You're home. You're safe now. You're with us." Liza looked at her mother, her eyes filled with conflicting emotions. There was relief, yes, but also fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the future, fear of herself. She had spent so many years in the grip of something she couldn't understand, something that had made her question everything, her identity, her worth, her family. And now as she sat in the sterile police station, surrounded by strangers and shadows from the past, she was forced to confront the truth. She had been lost. She had been manipulated. And now she had to find a way to rediscover who she was, who she had been meant to be. For a moment, Liza hesitated. She wanted to believe them. She wanted to trust them. But how could she? How could she trust the parents who had been ripped from her life so many years ago? How could she trust herself when everything she had known had been a lie? But Catherine's gentle touch, the warmth of her embrace, seemed to pierce through the darkness. For the first time in years, Liza allowed herself to feel the faintest stirrings of hope. She hadn't fully returned yet, but she could feel herself beginning to unravel the pieces of the woman she had once been, the woman she could still be. "I'm scared," Liza whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know who I am anymore." Catherine held her tighter, pulling her close. "You'll figure it out, sweetheart. You don't have to do it alone." And in that moment, John and Catherine knew that the journey ahead would be long. There would be no quick fixes, no easy answers. But they had their daughter back, and that, at least, was something. They had come to understand that healing wasn't a destination. It was a process, one that would take time, patience, and love. In the weeks that followed, Liza began the arduous task of rebuilding her life. She had a family again, a place to call home. But the scars of the past would take longer to fade. Slowly, with the support of her parents, she began to rediscover who she was. She wasn't just a victim of the past, but a survivor, someone who had fought her way back from the darkness. John and Catherine watched her grow stronger each day, but they also knew that their journey wasn't over. The trauma Liza had endured would take time to heal, and the memories of what had happened would never truly fade. But together they would face the future, knowing that the bond of love between them could never be broken. The story of Liza's disappearance, of the rituals, of the darkness that had consumed her life, was far from over. But for now, John and Catherine had their daughter back, and that, in itself, was enough. The rest would come in time. For the first time in a long while, they could see the light at the end of the tunnel. And as they left the police station, the small town of Woodsville seemed a little less lonely, a little less haunted, because for the first time in years, the Jamesons were finally whole again.